old. So there wasn't a way for you to come in and steal, through more conventional means, an Osage's oil money. So what they did is they began to marry into these families.
Oh, whoa.
And then they began to systematically plot to kill the person they had married. And sometimes because children will get a head right too, even the children you may have had with them. Yeah, it's crazy. It's kind of,
It's sick.
It's
in every way.
It's sick in every which way.
Now, you talk about having the idea at the beginning, and you brought this up like an hour ago, where you're saying you can have an idea of what you have, and you got to let the facts guide you to wherever it's going to land. So in this case, it lands on something that is actually, I think, far more serious based on what you're describing.
Way more serious.
But do you find it, just as a side note real quick, do you find it difficult sometimes as a storyteller, which is what you're doing? You're trying to take nonfiction things and tell the story of what happened. Do you find it difficult sometimes when you may be really digging into a story, maybe for the New Yorker, and you had an idea, oh, this is what happened and this is what it is, and then it turns out to kind of be, I don't know if you want to call it like a dud, but a lot less interesting than it was? Does that make, does the cognitive bias make it difficult to get there?
It's a great question. And you can become wedded. You can have tunnel vision. You can have tunnel vision. Yeah. I write about people with tunnel vision, investigations, whether they be scientific or criminal, where tunnel vision took over and the outcome became really disastrous and so you're cognizant, and we all have those biases. You've been focusing on one thing, you think it's this thing, you've been working on this thing for so long, you've been working it out in your brain, and then you're like, and it could take you a little while. Let's use Killers of the Flower Moon as an example, though. Great. So I remember when this started to settle, I was kind of like, it took me a while because you're trying to assess it, and then you're also just like assessing it practically. You're like, okay, I've spent all this time, thinking this is it, and you're like, okay, I have to kind of rip those outlines, they're getting all ripped up now, and this is a different story, and I've got to start to think about it in new ways. But one of the things which I struggle with is there is a cognitive bias in knowing the answer, both as an investigator and I know for the reader. So I know the reader is going to want answers. And suddenly I was confronted with all these other murders. I told you about Catherine, I told you about Mary Jo Webb, and they're saying, well, can you look into these cases? And I would look into a lot of the cases, and sometimes I might find some evidence that might pinpoint a suspect, but often, there were no proper investigation. The witnesses are dead, the perpetrators are dead.
Yep.
And I don't know. And so for a long time, I was confronted with that. Like, okay, well, I don't know. And how do I convey that? And then I think, and if I were earlier in my career, there's a cognitive bias to seem smarter than you are as a writer, or to seem like you've got godlike omniscience. I know all the answers, and you don't. And so I realized that this story is going to have this kind of gaping hole. And then the more I thought about it, that is part of the story. That is the horror, that these people like Mary Jo Webb and Catherine Redhorn had lived with these unresolved crimes. And so it did take me a while to kind of recollect. And the truth is really powerful. It's just figuring out what it is and how to convey it. But I ended up realize that's the theme of the book. I mean, rather than just be like, oh, let's just kind of pretend like I know the answer. Yeah, I'm not going to be able to know the answers, and there are going to be a lot of crimes as a reader. We're not going to know the full tally. It's open-ended. But imagine these people who have lived with this. It's a little like someone missing in action. You can't in a war. You don't have closure.
Yes.
And to me, that was really one of the horrors, because the perpetrators had erased not only the victims' lives, but in many cases their history. And to me, that was really, but it took me a while to realize, okay, that's what this book.
What do you mean they erased their history?
I can't. We don't know how they died. We don't know
Right.
who was the killer. Was it?
I thought you meant something else. Sorry.
No. They erased their history because they covered up the crimes. They got the bodies in the buried without a proper investigation, and they got away. I mean, they got away. They got away. They got
With
away.
murder and money.
Murder, money, and I can't. I had always thought my job was when you're doing a story about an injustice, you think, okay, all right, whatever it may be, you're not fixing the injustice in the sense that it's already taken place, people have died or whatnot, but you can at least, in a case like this, identify the names of the perpetrators and make sure everybody knows who the victims were. And in this case, you could identify the victims, but you could not ensure that those perpetrators' names are known to us and can at least be condemned in history. And that's horrible.
Yeah.
That's horrible.
What became of the money? Like, obviously they didn't kill every single Osage person, but Osage Nation member, but like, what does it look like today? Are a lot of the descendants of the killers living off the money that they were able to get through the head right?
So some still are getting blood money. I mean, there's not as much from a head right now because it's not the same amount of oil being extracted from the land in that area anymore. But there are still descendants of murderers, descendants of guardians who are receiving blood money, which is an outrage. And there's never been a kind of a complete tally, but at least several Osage and the government eventually paid the Osage about $300 million in kind of trust mismanagement, which just had to do not even with the murders, just had to do with general graft.
When was that? When did they do that?
This was, gosh, it's in my book and I should remember this, but it's more than a decade ago when that was resolved.
So way later.
Yeah, way later. But this was just for general mismanagement of Osage resources, but hundreds of millions of dollars were stolen through graft from the Osage, which has never been returned. But I'm glad you asked me the question about what is Osage Nation like today, because when you write about history, you're writing about a particularly traumatic moment, but history doesn't stop. And we often think of history, whatever time period you're writing about, as kind of this frozen moment. And the Osage to this day, they're a really vibrant nation. They have, I think, more than 20,000 citizens in the Osage Nation, voting members. They have their own constitution. They have other sources of wealth. They still have some oil money. And as an Osage lawyer told me when I was visiting one time doing my reporting, she said, we were victims of these crimes, but we don't live as victims.
That's a great way to look at it. I mean, it is many years later, and it's nice to see like the silver lining of them having a great community and all that, because you can fall into that trap where it's like, oh, fuck, we lost all that horrible injustice at one time, and it kind of becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy if you stay there.
Yeah, and I think there is sometimes a tendency with writers, especially outside these nations, to kind of write about the traumas and see it as kind of a frozen in time. So I'm glad you asked that. And I always think it's really important to emphasize that.
Did you, when you spoke with some of the descendants of people who had verifiably been involved in killing the Osage, did you have any difficult moments where you're like, you do understand you're being paid by blood money? Or something along those lines.
Yeah. I mean, those were difficult conversations to have. And, some of the descendants of the guardians were sometimes a little reluctant to talk or wouldn't, but some of the descendants of the killers did talk to me. Some of them expressed real remorse and said they are aware of what their ancestors had done. Well, one of the things that I lost my track of thought, so when I was talking a little bit about these were inheritance schemes and the interviews, one of the things you have to realize is that the murderers and the victims were often in the same household. So the descendants are often descendants. Both. And I'll just give you one very powerful visual image of that. When I interviewed Margie Burkhart is kind of the central figure in my book and kind of the soul of the book, and is also the central figure in the movie, played by Lily Gladstone. and I interviewed her granddaughter.
Not like her
No,
granddaughter.
her granddaughter.
Whoa.
And when you talk to her granddaughter, you realize how this is still living history. She said to me at one point, I didn't get to grow up with cousins. And you're kind of thinking about that. It's like, yeah, well, because all of her aunts and great aunt, they were all killed. So she, that's why she didn't have cousins. But she showed me a photograph. And it was a photograph of a little boy and a little girl. And the little boy was her father. And at that time, in the photograph, he was just a little boy. And I don't know how old he was. Maybe he was 6 or something. And the girl next to him is his sister. So it's Margie, who is the granddaughter of Molly. It's her father. So the son of Margie and the daughter of Margie. And they are standing, each of them beside a figure. And you could tell it's a man. And you look up this photograph and you're going up the man and you could see they're holding the hands of this man between them. And you go up, and then when you get to the top of the man, who's much taller than the 2 children, the top of the photograph is ripped off. So the head of the person is missing in this photograph. And I kind of knew, I wasn't sure, but I said, who was that? She said, well, that was Molly's husband. That was her grandfather, who was a killer.
Ernest.
That was Ernest.
Hey guys, if you haven't already subscribed, please hit that subscribe button. It's a huge, huge help. Thank you.
And so she said her father, who was just a boy in that photograph, had ripped off the head of his father in the photograph. And she used to refer to her father as Dynamite. He referred to his own father as Dynamite because he was involved in blowing up a house that killed one of Margie's sisters.
That's tragic.
Molly's sisters.
That's so tragic because he was poisoning his wife.
Yeah, he was involved in poisoning.
Right,
so
and she almost died from that.
she almost died from that.
And she didn't know he was doing it.
She did not know she was doing that.
Did you, in reading the records, like once he was arrested, because this is who Leonardo DiCaprio played in the film for everyone
Ernest,
out there.
yeah.
But once he was arrested, and I guess she had to come to terms with that her own husband was trying to kill her. Do we have any record of like what her emotional state was with that?
Yeah, I wish there was more. And that's where you go to your kind of, as a historian, you have limitations. I couldn't find a written record of her describing it, but I did get oral histories. And apparently she would grow nauseous even at the mention of his name. And was obviously deeply haunted. And I would ask, it's a kind of betrayal that is it's unfathomable.
Yes.
And I couldn't even after all those years ever fully understand what it must have been like for Molly, even interviewing her family members and her descendants, to realize that the person you thought you loved, the person you married, the person you thought loved you, the person you had children with, is trying to kill you, has killed your mother, killed your sisters, your siblings. I mean, because they were inheritance schemes, they involved a level of intimate betrayal.
You say unfathomable. I think that's a perfect way to put it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just like you wonder if someone like that is truly just evil in their heart. I mean, there has to be a level of evil in there, first of all. But you wonder if it's just that, or if there is also a complete, genuine, willful blindness to what they're doing because they're so focused on the bullshit, which is, oh, let me get more money.
Yeah. It was funny when DiCaprio was, thinking about who to play in the film, and he called me up at one point and said, he's thinking about playing Ernest Burkhart. And I
Subtle flex right there.
Leo. and I thought that was the right person to play because when you read the records, there is enough evidence that there was genuine affection between him and Molly, that there had been there was an emotional. He lived with someone, you married them, that he had genuine affection for, and Molly had genuine affection for them. I found a letter from her to him. She refers to him as my dear husband, and you could get some sense about that. And to me, understanding Ernest in many ways was more important than understanding the person who De Niro plays in the movie.
Hale.
Yeah. And Hale's a central figure, but Hale in many ways is sociopathic. I mean, when you read all the records, I mean, he is a sociopathic figure.
He didn't view them as human.
No, he didn't view them as human. And he just, yeah. But someone like Ernest goes along.
Yes.
And you gotta when a society does something like this, or whether you look at Germany, whether you look at Nazis, you didn't just have Goebbels and Hitler, you actually had all these other people who were going home to their families and tucking their kids in and then, loading you onto the train to die at the camp.
That's
and then
right.
Coming home. And so you got to try to understand Ernest, and you got to understand, how does somebody seemingly ordinary who does have a conscience, he's not devoid. He's not. You could tell he's not genetically devoid of a conscience. He's not a serial killer that kind of way.
He's manipulable.
He's manipulable. He's greedy. He's tempted. Has a mix of prejudice. All these things come together, and in the end, he goes along.
Yes.
He goes along to do these deeds, and that is a kind of. I think it's more important for us to reckon with people like that in some ways than with the kind of, the just purely evil figure. Because in a way you can almost separate that figure from the rest of us.
Yes, that's not us.
Yeah, Ernest, there were lots of Ernests. There are lots of Ernests in this world. And so what is it about a figure like that? And, partly you write these books to try to understand Ernest so that we don't become Ernest.
Yes, and there will always be some person out there like a Hale who is a sociopath and is perfectly willing to use other people as a vessel and manipulate them, like a mob boss. That's effectively what he did here, a mob boss of serial killing. But, in your research of Ernest, because the interesting part about this story is also the time when it takes place. It's in that weird 20-year period, which is between World War I and World War II. And Ernest is a World War I vet who's coming home, looking for work, trying to get whatever. Were you able to find in your research, what his experience in World War I was, and if that affected him in some way?
Not a ton. I got his military record. I knew he had served. I knew when he had served. I don't think he had seen, it's been a while, I don't think he had seen a lot of combat. But I don't know. I know that what you get a sense of from the records and from interviews and from people. I interviewed one someone who was alive, a child at the time, who was still alive, who was even at one of the funerals and helped me describe the funeral scene.
Oh my God!
Yeah, when Molly's sister Anna dies, I knew someone who was at that funeral as a little girl. But Ernest was, he was, drawn to these boom towns, to the oil wealth, to the kind of, he liked to play poker, he liked to drink. Molly clearly detected some level of kind of sensitivity beneath that rough exterior. But he was kind of one of many, who were kind of, what would happen is oil would be struck in one of these towns. It's crazy to read because the oil would be struck, like one of the largest deposits of oil would be suddenly struck. And literally within days, you'd have 10,000 people there.
Like a gold rush.
Yeah, it was a gold rush. And these camps would suddenly go up and everybody was living. And he was kind of, and these were boom towns. The one of the names of these boom towns was called Whiz Bang because they whizzed all day and they banged all night.
It's a whole rabbit hole to go into because, we could have, once again, like your other stories, we could have situations like this happen today. The ones, I don't know, maybe saving grace that I take from something like this is, though, there was a clear, willful ignorance of the government and of, the federal government and obviously the local government to even look into these cases or whatever. And today, I wonder if that would, with the internet age, I'm sure it's still possible, but if something like this could ever happen without really getting, it shouldn't take the pressure of the public, but without getting the attention of the public to pressure to say like, oh, we need to get to the bottom of this.
Yeah, and you had widespread corruption back then. You had government officials who were complicit, and you had people and you had lawmen who were complicit. And
Did you uncover evidence of that yourself?
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. You could find. I mean, there were lawmen who were guardians and were getting rich off the system.
Yeah.
You had private detectives who were hired, and they were just covering up evidence for people. They weren't exposing it; they were just covering it up. They were completely crooked. So. Again, there was that level of complicity and level of prejudice fueled together at the time that, one would hope. But I do think it's why we as human beings always need to check ourselves.
Yeah.
And we always need to be vigilant. And we always need to examine our conscience. And we always need to try to learn from the past. I do think, stories shape who we are. And I think these kind of stories can, hopefully, kind of shape the kind of people you want to be. Who do we want to be? Who do we want to be as a people? But yes, you would certainly hope that, that is always your hope. But there is a fragility to society and to institutions and to human nature. And the more I research, the more you become aware of that. And we should not, as people, take things for granted, and we should cherish what is right and fix what is wrong.
100%. Always trying to move the ball forward.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for all the background on that. It's really cool that also came to life through one of the goats as well. So if people haven't seen the movie, go check that out. We'll have the links to the book down below and all the books. But we had put a pin in Percy Fawcett and the Lost City of Z, which is, it's a tragic tale, but it's Percy Fawcett's like this heroic figure. He's this larger than life type guy, this British industrious kind of dude, but industrious not for business, industrious to go into the middle of the jungle and find the secrets. And he went down, obviously, somewhere in there. But, I can't remember if this was off camera as well, because we were talking before, but what was the first inkling in you wanting to look into his story?
You never know where you're going to find a story. I don't think I told you this. I was doing a story for the New Yorker magazine on the world's greatest Sherlock Holmes scholar, who was found mysteriously garroted in his apartment. True story. And so I was reading everything about Conan Doyle, who wrote the Sherlock Holmes books, and I was reading a biography or some text. It was very boring, but there was a footnote that said that Conan Doyle's novel *The Lost World* was partly inspired by this character, this real life explorer named Percy Harrison Fawcett. I had never heard of the guy, and so I looked him up, and then up, in these old newspaper archives, and up came these like banner headlines in the New York Times. British explorer disappears into the Amazon with his oldest son. British explorer not heard from for months. Wife of British explorer believes he's still alive. Movie star goes in search of missing explorer. Movie star disappears. And you're just like, this is the craziest story. And you're like, and it was kind of one of these sensations in its day. I mean, it was everywhere. It would have been like, it was like the OJ story of its day. You just couldn't, you could have been, I mean, there were cartoons that influenced Tintin. I mean, there were, you could have been anywhere. And like, it was the best analogy would have been like saying at a certain point, if you said like, where's Jimmy Hoffa buried?
Yes.
People would say, where is Fawcett? Like, where is Fawcett? Because he vanished. Yeah. So that was its origin. So it was a footnote. It was literally a footnote in a boring book.
That's it.
That was it. It's just a footnote.
And then you just went down the rabbit hole.
And then I went down the rabbit hole.
Okay. And as you said, you're not an explorer by nature.
Oh, come on. Now, can take one look at me. I'm Larry David. No, yes, I'm not an explorer. Now, I will say,
But you did it.
I did it. And the funny thing is, we talked about the wager, and like, I love the sea. And I've actually, I've done things at sea. And so even though like I'm not used to those kind of seas, I'm used to sea. I'm not a jungle person. I mean, I hate to camp. I really do. I don't get the whole camping thing. I never have. I mean, like, what do you do? You're just going to lay there in the woods? I know. I feel people are going to mock me. Your listeners.
I'm getting PTSD right now because I did it in the Amazon last May.
Oh, you did? How was it?
We're not going to talk about that.
Oh,
it was tough.
It's tough, right?
Yeah, Paul Rosalie took me to an abandoned beach deep by the Brazilian border where the uncontacted tribes are, and there was an incident that night with some leafcutter ants.
Oh, shit.
I think I filled my camping tank
Yeah.
for the rest of my life.
Oh, yeah.
And the whole time, David, when I was sitting in that tent in hell while we were about to get eaten, I was also thinking about the bug that bites you on the lip that you wrote about.
Oh.
That then, you think you're fine, and 20 years later, you keel over
Oh,
dead.
you just die.
That was not a nice thought to
That
have
was not
on
nice.
that
Well,
beach.
I'll tell you. So I always hire a fact checker to fact check my books, and it's a New Yorker fact checker usually, or another fact checker, and they go through it and they just make sure. I do my own check-in, and I have someone else check it just to make sure I'm accurate. I don't want to have mistakes, and inevitably you might have one, but you want to try to be as careful and as accurate as you can. I remember after my trip, there's a scene in the book. It's actually one of the craziest diaries I've ever read. There's a scene because Fawcett had done several expeditions before he did his final expedition looking for this place he called Z, where he disappeared with his older son and his older son's best friend. But he had kind of mapped a lot of the borders, a lot of the states of Bolivia and in the jungle. And he had at one point gone on an expedition with an explorer who had actually been with Shackleton. I'm pretty sure he'd been with Shackleton.
In Antarctica?
Yeah, in Antarctica.
Yeah.
And he decided to team up with Murray was his name. It's been a long time. I haven't talked about Z in a long time. And he teamed up with Fawcett.
That's a good story.
And they're both kind of, they're both egomaniacs. They're both, who's the better explorer, who's, and Murray's like the Antarctic's harder and Fawcett's like, the jungle. But they are two completely different forms of exploration, as I came to realize. One is about a complete deprivation. If you're in Antarctica, it's actually a deprivation of all your senses, a lack of color, a lack of biodiversity. I mean, nothing's alive. Yeah. And when you're in the jungle, it's the exact opposite. It's like an overwhelming stimuli.
Everything's alive.
Everything is alive.
Yes.
Everything around you, right? I mean, as you know.
Yeah.
And, bugs, whatever, snakes are the things that got you. And so in any case, they go on this expedition, and Murray it's the craziest diary I think I've ever read.
It's like a black comedy when you write that part.
Oh yeah, it's just crazy. And I don't even remember what they're like these bot things. I didn't remember. They drop something on you. It's been so long now. They drop something on you, and then it's like a thing, and it burrows under your skin. And then it burrows under your skin, and it's a worm, basically. Yeah. It's like a little, and it grows inside your body. It's growing, and then your head would sometimes pop out of your skin. And Murray's getting his whole body taken over by these things, and he's losing his mind, as you can imagine. And Fawcett, who was as tough as nails, and also...
You're too slow!
He is! No, are you kidding me? Not only was he too slow, Fawcett was, I'm telling you, Fawcett was the last person I'd ever, you ever want to be on an expedition with, because Fawcett was just like, I'm getting to point Z, or, I'm getting there, and you know what? And he would make them actually, anyone who joined an expedition had to agree that, yeah, if at a certain point you're dying,
too bad,
we're going to leave you because we can't carry you out. We're not going to survive. And so that's part of the deal. You have to basically join a contract. And so Murray, at a certain point, his body's getting taken over by these worms, and he's losing his mind because he's just so grossed out by these things. And Fawcett, at a certain point, he's like, yeah,
leave him.
There's a horse. We'll, go that way. go that way, and hopefully you'll find it.
And there's, by the way, for people out there, there's no jungle trails.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
You're not like sitting in the middle of a path waiting for. No. This is brush everywhere. You have to machete your way through it, and as you said, everything grows on top of each other. Like every time Paul goes out on the pathways that they've carved, just their little areas near there. He brings a machete, and he would hand us machetes because they're constantly cutting down new brush that grew from like the fucking day before.
Yeah, 100%,
crazy,
100%. It's like it's like a green out. I mean, you just and there's a certain point where you could just get completely. If you don't know where you're going, you will get completely turned around.
Yes.
So in any case, Murray ends up, he somehow manages to survive, and then they have this horrible feud back in England, and it's kind of a scandal, and they're trying to keep the scandal from reaching the press. But the reason I tell the story is my fact checker, back to my fact checker,
it's a good tangent.
So my fact checker is fact checking the worms, and I've kind of described the length of them based on the diaries, how long they were and how long they grew. And she, David, I really want to show you something, and she goes to the computer, and there was like a YouTube video of one of these things, and somebody's having it pulled out of his back. And I looked at that thing. I looked at that thing, and I said, first of all, I was so grossed out, but I said, thank God I saw that after the fact, because had I seen that before, I never would have gone.
Yeah. Yeah, there's people I know who will not go with Paul down there. I'm like, oh, it's great. You should go. He's got it under control. But there is so much that can go wrong.
Oh yeah, and I don't like
it's
snakes,
crazy.
and yeah, but I mean, I will say it was a remarkable trip, but it did not make me love the jungle. I will say
Where did you go, by the way?
I was in the Xingu, southern basin of the Amazon, along the Xingu River
In Brazil.
in Brazil. Yeah, it's in southern basin of the Amazon, and for me because I'm not a jungle person, and the trip did not turn me into a jungle person. But I had these meetings with various indigenous communities along the way, set up by a guide, and met with the Kwikuru and the Kalapala, and that was just incredible experiences.
Yeah.
I mean, just amazing. I mean, and hearing oral history. I mean, someone had oral histories about Fawcett. I mean,
what'd they say?
Oh yeah, because Fawcett, for the Kalapalas, Fawcett was among the first white people they had ever seen, and they have, they have an oral tradition, and an anthropologist had actually translated one of these oral histories about their encounter with Fawcett.
Whoa!
And they're beautiful. I mean, they're kind of like an epic poem. I mean, they're really these beautiful oral histories because she had translated them so beautifully, and it actually, first of all, we talked about skepticism. It's like, okay, in oral history, is it accurate? Well, in the oral history, they describe Fawcett as playing a little musical instrument. I knew that because I had in private letters from Fawcett to his wife that he brought a recorder with him. That was not ever in the press, never made public.
You checked that?
Oh, yeah. I'd never seen it. It was never mentioned. So I was like,
that's good. They're good.
This is good.
They're on it.
The story. This is not BS. This is a real story.
Go on.
Yes, exactly. And then that story had real clues because they said they tried to discourage them from heading, was it east? I think it was.
Like their ancestors had.
Yeah. In this oral history. And they were repeating the oral history for me. Actually, one of the descendants was repeating the oral history to me. And they're trying to dissuade them from heading east to where they referred to as the Fierce Indians, a group. And then they describe how they could see the fire rising into the sky from their encampment for several days, and then the fire went out. And then they go and they inspect the area eventually, and there's no sign of them, but the implication is they've been killed. And it's probably the most likely explanation too, because first of all, Fawcett was such a survivor. The idea that all three of them would have died and communication would have ceased instantly from all of them suggests they were killed abruptly. And also, and he just had powers of survival kind of living in the jungle, So I thought that oral history had real clues.
Yeah, the level of the sinister nature of them dying, though, could be a range. It could be as sinister as an uncontacted tribe got a hold of them and, I don't know, ate them or something, whatever, something crazy like that. Or it could be a tree fell on them. Yeah. Or, a jaguar got to him.
Hunger.
Disease, sure.
Hunger. I mean, that's the thing you learn about the jungle, too. Especially the Europeans would often starve because they weren't accustomed to finding food. It's really challenging, even in that very biodiverse area, to find food if you're not good at it, know. And it was partly why a lot of Europeans always thought, the jungle is completely uninhabitable because they would get in there, they would get disease, and they would die. And yet, indigenous communities, a little bit like the Karaskar we talked about, they've been there for hundreds and hundreds of years, and they know how to live there, and they've adapted to the terrain. And terrain that seems so hostile to foreigners, to them has, they have plants that, offer medicines. In the groups where I was using, they would use this kind of, they would shoot these darts and have a kind of I don't remember it's like a poison, but it's not quite a poison. It doesn't kill you, but it would stun the fish. And then the fish would just get stunned.
And float.
And they would float. And then they would just pick them up and they would still be alive. And then they would eat them. They wouldn't even have to fish them out.
That's nuts.
Yeah.
Yeah, Paul has a quote. He said there's a sap for that instead of there's an app for that. When he talks about how they use, like what they use in the jungle. Because he lives with all of his friends and the people he works with there grew up in the jungle.
Yeah.
They're all indigenous people from the jungle. They're brilliant. These are people that can hear a bird from 2 miles away and know exactly what it is and almost what it's saying too. And he's always talking about, like, when he comes back to the Western world, 2-3 months out of the year, it's like all the problems we invent and then all the things we think we understand, like medically even, he's like half of it's wrong. because they can handle themselves out there and survive in horrible conditions sometimes and actually live longer.
Yeah,
as well.
Yeah, I mean the way their expertise in the plants is just kind of remarkable.
Yes.
And of course now you have so many scientists who are going into the jungles to try to study these plants for modern medicines. But even that I just gave that example of the thing with the fish. But I mean it's just kind of like incredible.
Yeah.
I mean these little kids go in there with a bow and arrow, they just shoot this thing into the water, and suddenly up come all these piranha, and they just eat the piranha.
That's it.
That's it.
Now, why was Percy Fawcett so obsessed with the Lost City of Z? And what was the nature of him even finding out about it?
Yeah. So, he grew up, it's funny, you grow up at a certain age and whatever, we grew up with athletes or whatnot, these people we read about are astronauts and these people that kind of fill our minds and our imaginations. And so when he was growing up as a child, it was kind of this era of Victorian exploration where these people would go out into the world and their stories were huge. They were read, they're like the Bible, everybody was reading them. And so he was greatly influenced by these stories, and they just kind of captured his imagination. He served in the military, and then he eventually he goes to the Royal Geographical Society. He kind of goes to a little manuals from a time point are great historical resources.
Manuals?
If you want to understand a time period, it's often don't read like the big history book. Look at the manuals. So there were little manuals for these people who go there, like if you're going to be an explorer, what to do.
Oh.
And so these is a little like if you were trying to understand, like look at the wedding pages in the New York Times. If you wanted to see how cultures changed over decades, just look at the wedding page. Like sometimes these weird things tell you stories you don't expect.
God, that's so good. The wedding pages.
Yeah. And so, you look at these manuals. So I went to the Royal Geographic and I'm looking at these manuals that he actually read and he carried with him. I knew he had them. I knew he read them. He carried them with him. They're telling you how to survive. If you get this, cut off your arm. It's like, oh, I love this one. If you get wounded, you take gunpowder, you pack it into the wound, and then you blow it, and light it up to like cauterize a wound. But you're kind of seeing how they would survive. But in any case, so he went there, he kind of trained, and then he gets a job to kind of mapping and doing cartography in South America. And he has these remarkable powers of endurance. And slowly on these expeditions, he's doing them over years, and he would go for like 2 years at a time. You got to realize and there isn't, no sat phone. I mean,
it's crazy.
You're gone. I mean, you're just gone.
It's literally crazy.
Your wife and your children, you're just gone. I mean, I always. Their story is hugely important too. So what are they going through? And as he would do these expeditions, he began to gather these kind of clues. First of all, he was kind of obsessed with El Dorado and these dreams, but he would gather these clues. Like he'd be in the in the jungles of Bolivia, and he would see these earth mounds. You're like, oh, these look like earth mounds. He would say,
earth mounds.
Yeah, these large, but they look man-made. They look man-made. These kind of earthworks. They look like pyramidal, but they were made of earth. There's not a lot of stone in the Amazon.
No.
And then he would be going along, and he would find pottery. Just looked, they couldn't date it back then, but just looked really, old. And so he started to gather kind of these clues, and he started to think, I think there were these are remnants of these ancient civilizations, and that there were people there. Now,
had he read like Francisco de Orellana?
Oh,
stuff?
yeah, he read all that stuff. And, it's interesting, people are trapped. And, Fawcett is interesting because Fawcett had a lot of racism. And so on one level, he's very radical because he's kind of saying, okay, I think these indigenous people were really capable. And a lot of other people are saying, no, they couldn't have. They couldn't do these things because of, Victorian and Edwardian prejudice were off.
No, I would have never guessed that.
Off the
they
charts.
Weren't like that at all.
Yeah, they're like, there's no way these Amazonian people could have done that. But so he kind of, there were these myths then about kind of like white Indians, and he kind of fell prey to this bullshit. And so that's kind of how he's trying to square the circle. He can never quite fully escape it. But he is finding these evidence of these ruins, and he begins to become convinced it is there. And what's interesting, you mentioned these El Dorado texts, which he would read, and these texts are really interesting.
Yeah, who wrote it again? It was like the priest or
Oh
something that
gosh,
was
yes,
with
it
him?
was the priest oh God, it's been, this is what happens. You write a new book, you
It's all
forget the
right.
old book. But
The
yes,
comments will check
I read
us.
it. Yes, do check us. But that's a crazy account if you read some of those. Yeah, the priest wrote that one, and but you would read some of these early El Dorado people who went into the jungle looking for gold, as was the wont of the conquistadors, and they would describe in these accounts these kind of fabulously described large populations, towns, bridges,
Gold.
yeah, all these things they would see, and over time, when other explorers would go into the Amazon and not find anything, and populations had dwindled to really more tribal societies. They concluded that these accounts were all myths and that they had been written just to kind of impress the king, that their journeys have been disastrous. So let's write something to impress them and justify what we've done. And there's no doubt that some of that was true, but people like Fawcett would read these accounts and say, no, I think this is evidence that there were lots of people here and that these things really were here.
And that it could still be there.
Yeah. What's so interesting about modern archaeology is they're now starting to find in those places where those conquistadors had gone, they're finding black earth. Black earth is kind of earth that has been enriched from kind of human remains and waste. And what does that mean? It means lots of people once lived there. People were there. And so now scholars are going back on these texts and they're starting to look at them and starting to realize actually some of these do have actually evidence of larger populations. And they start to find even where Fawcett had found these earth mounds. Archaeologists have now studied those earth mounds and realized that these things are massive earthworks built by human beings, in some ways as sophisticated as the pyramids. Now, they weren't done with stone because stone didn't exist, but they had elaborate irrigation systems. And when you date a lot of these ruins and you start to date some of them, and some of the sites, some date quite far back, but often they might date to around 1500, like in the area where Fawcett. And what happened then?
That was when Oriana was going through down the Amazon.
And what did they
River.
bring? And what did they bring? Disease.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Exposure, the first exposure to disease, which wiped out so many Native Americans.
Yes.
So when then later explorers were kind of coming into this area and just seeing these kind of small, hunter-gathering groups that were kind of mobile, they assumed that's the way the Amazon had always been. And more evidence is indicating, no, that's not the way the Amazon really was. That there were these much larger populations who had much larger civilizations who had these earthworks. And in fact, in the area where Fawcett disappeared, when I was there on my trip, and I was staying with the Quicuros, who was an
Is that like Dead Horse Camp or something?
Yeah, well, Dead Horse Camp was the last known sighting where they were seen from, and then they vanished.
That's still in Brazil, though, right?
That is still in Brazil, in the southern basin. And when I was visiting the Quicuros, there was an archaeologist living there, and Michael Heckenberg, and he said to me, I want to show you something. And he took me there with the Quicuro chief, and we went out. He got his machete. He starts, chopping,
sharpen that baby up.
Sharpen that baby up and go in there. And he starts showing me, and there's this kind of area that it looks like, it's kind of all dug out. It's kind of going around, and it's kind of a large wedge of earth that's kind of going downward. I said, what is that? He says, it's a moat. And then he starts showing me this other areas. Well, over here, there were bridges and, earth bridges. And he had found evidence of all these settlements dated to this same time period. And they had roads. He had found evidence of roads that were built at these right angles, these right.
Yeah.
And so, and the crazy part is Fawcett probably walked right over them because, the thing that he would have expected stone to some degree or gold or whatnot. And some of his, by the end, his ideas are kind of a mix of myth and reality, and also probably by the end, some madness.
Yes.
Especially after serving World War I. I mean, after World War I, he witnessed the complete collapse of Western civilization. So his notion of Z began to change. It went from kind of a very practical, concrete thing into something kind of more dazzling, almost
To
like
aspire to?
to get to almost like a refuge, like
Okay.
almost like an Atlantic, something that was
Yeah,
like a
yeah.
more golden, almost because he had witnessed, he was at the Battle of the Somme. I mean, where people just 10,000 people die in a day, climb out of the trench and die. He was there.
Yeah, he's one of the most unique people.
Yeah,
I've ever
gassed
read
and
about.
just crazy. So, but in any case, he, a lot of these things are earthworks. So the jungle, you described it perfectly. Your friend, within a day or two, the jungle's back, and so the jungle would kind of overgrow a lot of these earthworks, and so he probably walk right over some of his dreamlands.
I'm thinking about it like in where I was, where some of it's carved out. And the way you describe it of everything's alive and it's all just like in your face is perfect, because if I were going back in there like treasure hunt or something, I wouldn't even know where to look, because you're literally watching like where your next step is going to be. There's so much going on that, a treasure hunt could be something as simple as like a root that you see, and then you got to go down and pull the root, and then after you pull the root, you pull the dirt, and then eventually you get a shimmer of gold, and then you got to dig fucking 10 feet down, and maybe you get it. How do you even do that in the middle of a vegetative jungle? It's crazy to me.
There was a moment where I got separated from my guide.
Oh no.
And
I see a Larry David episode already.
It was so pathetic. I'm so pathetic. But in any case, I and so I'm just waiting and waiting for him to come back, and eventually I'm like, it's starting to get dark. I better go. So I'm trying to find. So I head out. There's a very funny story which I almost too embarrassed to tell.
Oh, you're already too deep in.
All right, so I'm the only idiot who brings their laptop computer into the jungle.
Oh, no.
And let me tell you, this was like 2007, maybe 2005, I think, when I made my trip. A laptop computer in 2005 weighs about 2 tons. I mean, it was just this big.
It's a brick.
It's a brick. I mean, I still have it. It's truly. And I had, I'd always brought a computer with me on my reporting trips, because you got to type and stuff. It's like, who brings a laptop into the computer? So I brought it to the jungle. But I had it with me, and I had been carrying it with me and transporting it. So I set off looking with this laptop computer that weighs, a brick. And I head into the jungle. And just as you were saying, at a certain point, if you're not familiar with the biodiversity, it kind of all looks the same. It just a lot of greenery, and you're just like, wait, did I just walk past that point? Am I walking in circles? And I thought I was going in a straight line, and then I realized, wait, I think I'm circled back. Yeah. And then you start to panic, and so then you're just kind of walking out, and then I'm in the water, and I'm water up to like my waist, and I have this laptop computer, and I'm but I'm like, at that point I had this weird, it was like this weird thing. I was like, but I can't let go of my laptop computer, which I can't even use in the jungle. So I'm carrying this damn thing on my head as I'm walking through the water, and I'll never forget. I hear this noise. And then I start to see things kind of flitting about.
You're like, this is it.
I'm like, yeah, this is the end.
There's the jaguar.
And then I hear this kind of weird. It almost felt it was a peculiar sound. It was a kind of a flitting sound. It was like, I wish I could describe it. It was musical, but it sounded almost like laughter. And I'm like, what the hell's going on? And then suddenly emerges from the jungle all these little kids. And they were all these Quikurus who had been sent out to try to find me.
Oh, my God.
And they just saw this picture. They did not know who Larry David was. They thought I was the funniest damn thing they had ever seen. They're probably sitting around now. They're 30 years later going, do you remember
gringo.
that idiot in the jungle? And he was carrying a laptop computer, and he didn't know which way was, east, north. Or
Oh, my God. Yeah, that's a very New York story.
Oh, yeah, it's classic.
New York does the jungle.
That was classic.
Yeah.
I'm embarrassed to tell that story. Oh, wait, can I just give the coda to the story?
Yeah.
So I managed to get that computer back home, and it never worked again. It was completely broken from the rain and the water.
Oh,
it just never worked. It got beaten up. Who takes a computer? It just didn't survive. And it was like, also they were prehistoric, those computers back
then. Did you
then.
get your files off it?
Yeah, I probably, I don't know if I actually ever did. No, I don't think it ever worked again. And I still have the damn thing.
Well, that might have some good shit on
Yeah,
it.
that
You
might
could
have
send that
good,
in.
okay. All right. Yeah, we should look for that.
Yeah, we should talk about
All right,
that.
we get some links up there.
Yeah, I just had John Kiriakou in here who gave us the subtle flex. He always does these subtle flexes off camera. He's like, yeah, I actually lost my hard drive. It got wiped last year. So I called up Edward Snowden. 6 hours later, we had it. I'm like, oh, you called up Edward Snowden. He's like, yeah, he's in Russia. I'm like, I know, John. Like, he just, how'd you get it? He's like, oh, he did the whole code over the phone. So maybe we'll get you Edward Snowden, see what happens. But with Percy Fawcett, I love the image that you gave in the book where you described this, and you kind of said this a little bit ago, where it's like these were the modern day heroes. So when you describe him leaving New York, he came over from Britain to New York to like set sail. And there's all these headlines like, oh, we're going to wave off Percy Fawcett. He's going to go find the lost city of Z. And obviously he never came home. Now, when did they lost contact with him because he would like have a messenger go back at some point and it would come back and forth. That was a little confusing to me. But at some point, the messenger went and he wasn't there. When did it become like a public story that it's like, ooh, he's probably dead?
Yeah. So it's crazy. So part of it was really one of the great kind of media stories this day. Partly he needed to try to fund his expedition. And so he contracted with a media group. So he was writing dispatches along the way, and these dispatches would get printed out and they would get, on telegraphs and they would be sent around the world. So you could be in Africa and Asia, wherever you might be. In
Twitter
England.
before Twitter.
Twitter before Twitter. You could get your tweet. And then when he went into the jungle, for a long period, he continued to write these dispatches. And he would encounter either someone who was part of his group. He would have them pieces of paper, and these people would then carry them out. And it might take them a month and a half to get back, and then it might take, another month for them to be typed up in a telegraph and broadcast. So people were following the news in real time, although it was probably about a 2-month lag time.
Yeah.
Which is crazy. But people were holding their breath because they were able to read this, and they were able to read his own accounts. And in one of his last accounts, he says, I may be out of contact for a while now. We're now heading into the,
Dun, dun, dun.
yeah, exactly. And that was kind of, so you had his words, and it was almost as if it like went off into an ellipse, and you're just kind of waiting and waiting and waiting. And soon, as often happens with these things, theories begin to emerge. Many people couldn't ever wrap their brain around the fact that he may have died, including his wife, who held on to the belief for, decades later that her husband has to be alive somewhere in the jungle because he was indestructible. And others, said, there's a Tintin, the strip, these novels, these stories, Tintin, where, it's like Fawcett is depicted as being too happy. He doesn't want to go back to the urban modern world that is emerging of cities and machineries. And then, of course, there were some who thought he was dead. Some thought he was being held. And then some people try to look for him and try to gather evidence. There's this movie star that goes and looks for him. There's a Swiss trapper who goes and looks for them, and they're not heard from again.
Swiss trapper?
A Swiss trapper, sorry. I didn't say
he wasn't heard from again?
I'm pretty sure, the Swiss trapper was not heard from again, and the movie star was not heard from again. He was kind of like a B-list movie star. Yeah, C-list, yes, exactly.
He doesn't have a lot of memorials.
No.
Like, fuck that guy.
But he thought this could be my chance. I mean, he did think this is my chance to stardom.
Loved him in Friends. He wasn't good after that. So they all go in looking for him. What's that over like a 5, 6, 7
over
year
5,
period?
6, 7 year period. Yep. People are looking for him, and it just kind of then went into. Then it kind of goes into conspiracy land.
And he's dead. And
is he dead? Is he alive? Is this? Is he that? And everyone has a different theory. Where's Hoffaberry? Where's Fawcett buried?
What do you think happened?
I think it's that oral history that they decided to head further east into an area where, according to the Kalapalos, they referred to them as the Fierce Indians, it was a more warring group. And you have to understand, too, that, and as your friend, I'm sure would tell you, there's so much incursion onto indigenous lands from outsiders, from whether they had been rubber trappers or people trying to get loggers, that a lot of the indigenous groups, they very fiercely defend their areas because they're constantly under threat. And so I think they went east, and that the Kalapalos saw their fire for several days, and that they were killed shortly after, and their fire went out. As I think there's a great word in the oral history. I can't remember what it was, but and that they were killed.
Do you think it was the kind of thing where they were just a threat and they were quickly killed, or do you think it could have been more ritualistic? Or
it's interesting
really
in the film
say?
he depicts it, James Gray, as more ritualistic. I don't know. I don't know. I don't. Again, there's those elements of history where you can't go.
Yeah. Now, Paul's what you would like him because he's one of these guys who's always like rolling his eyes at shit where people just run with a strand on stuff.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of things in the Amazon that he pushes back on publicly because people will say things like the entire Amazon's man-made or something now based on some of the man-made evidence, and it's like that's not the proper way to put it. But one of the things that keeps him up at night that he's talked about before on here, and I've talked with him off camera about it, is, he works with all these indigenous tribes, and they don't contact the uncontacted tribes, but they know where they are, and they kind of know who each other is. He's known guys who have been killed by them. We met one of his rangers who was literally shot with an arrow right here and had to swim underneath the Amazon to safety from these guys. I mean, it's a real thing. But he's like, within the uncontacted tribes, deeper, far past them, there are even more uncontacted tribes. And there's people where it's not only that they're uncontacted, they've never been seen before. Because the Amazon to him is a lot, and I think I agree with him, it's a lot like the ocean. There's a lot we haven't even seen of it. And there are some stories that bother him where it's like, according to some oral histories from some of these other tribes and stuff, kind of like what you were hearing, there is allegedly some pyramids in the Amazon, and there are uncontacted tribes that protect them. And I always wonder if, like Fawcett said, for example, on one of those last telegraphs, we're not going to be seen for a while. Whatever direction he did go, if he went deep enough that he actually got to one of those, I wonder if he actually saw something that, even if it's not El Dorado, it's like a remnant of it, and then he died.
That's certainly, those were kind of the theories that, emerged. Some people said, believed he had found whatever this place he was, the Z. It's interesting, and I'm always, careful. I think there is a tendency where there are places that are remote, and remote enough that there are places that are less, we don't have, you don't have everyone with their iPhone taking pictures like we do now. And I think through centuries, the Amazon became a place where people would project onto them what they wanted to see or what they needed or whatever their desires were. And over time that might change. And I think you see that. I mean, the Amazon is a place of mythology, because usually what will often happen in areas that are less known, we tend to want to fill in the stories, right? We want to fill in those blanks. I'm always very skeptical in the sense of, as the historian, I just kind of am like, okay, I can't get there. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. And the hardest,
that's a good way to be.
And you know what? The hardest thing is just to say, I don't know. I don't know. And so, even with Fawcett, I tell you, what do I think happened? Okay. I think that's what's happened. I don't know.
Just a guess. Yeah.
It's just a guess. It's an educated guess. It's probably a more informed guess based on the evidentiary trail and based on things you would met. But at the end, it's still supposition.
Yes. And it's funny, Alessio, he'll recognize this, but I've complimented people in here before where I bring in an expert on something, and one of my favorite things about them will be that they are willing to say the words, I don't know, or I'm not sure, or that's not my area. Yeah. Because we kind of live in this world where people are like, oh, you should be a personal Google on every single thing. And if you look into something, you should know everything. That's not how it is. These things are very complicated, and where you can't find evidence on stuff, you shouldn't come out and say, based on the evidence, I can say that. No, you got to be able to say, look, we don't have enough information there. So I respect that a lot, because obviously it's clear in your books, you dig as deep as you can.
I go as far
dig.
as I can go. I go as far. And I'm desperate to know. I mean, even though I say, what is the impulse? It is a desperate desire to close the gap.
100%.
And that is what you're after. You're just trying to close the gap. But you get to a point. I always reach a point. It's the hardest point, where I have to say, I could keep going for another 30 years and I don't think I'm going to close that gap, and I got to go sit down and write.
Seems like a good place to leave it right there. David, this has been awesome, man.
Thank you, man.
You're a great writer. I really love Lost City of Z. I'm looking forward to reading the other ones as well.
Thank you. Appreciate it. It was fun to do.
Of course. Thank you so much for coming through to do this. It was my pleasure. And we'll have the links to The Wager, your latest one, down below, as well as your other books. So just double check that when we put it out.
You got it.
We'll have everything in there for you, but everyone go check him out. Guy's a great writer, and obviously Marty Scorsese loves him. So good luck with the newest movie whenever that's going to get going.
Thanks, man.
All right.
Thank you.
Everybody else, you know what it is. Give it a thought. Get back to me. Peace. Thank you guys for checking out this clip. If you haven't already subscribed, please subscribe and hit the like button on this video. It is a huge, huge help. And if you'd like to check out this clip's full podcast episode, that link is in the description below or right here. And finally, you can follow me on Instagram and X by using the links in my description below.